The helicopter's blades chopped through the Arctic air as we descended toward what looked like nothing more than an oil drilling platform. Ice crystals formed on the windows, obscuring my view of the endless white expanse below. I'd seen my share of classified facilities during my time in Delta Force, but this place was different. No markings, no flags, not even the usual security measures visible from above. 5 minutes to touchdown, sir, the pilot's voice crackled through my headset. I nodded, though my mind was still trying to process the briefing I'd received 3 days ago. An unmarked folder, an untraceable phone call, and a set of coordinates that led to this god-forsaken corner of Alaska. I am, or was, Captain Knox, Shadow Blackwood, Delta Force operator with 12 years of combat experience across 3 continents. The kind of resume that usually leads to a cushy training position or private security work. Instead, it led me here to whatever this place was. The helicopter touched down on a landing pad that emerged from beneath the snow like a trapdoor. As I stepped out into the bitter cold, I noticed the first sign that this wasn't your typical black site. The hangar door was inscribed with symbols I'd never seen before, definitely not military standard. A figure emerged from a doorway, face obscured by a heavy, Arctic parka. They gestured for me to follow, and I shouldered my duffel bag, following them into the facility. The temperature difference hit me like a wall as we entered, and my guide lowered their hood, revealing a shock of white hair despite a relatively young face. "Captain Blackwood," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Director Winters. Welcome to Project Chimera." The facility's interior defied its exterior appearance. Instead of the expected industrial corridors, I found myself walking through what looked more like a cross between a military command center and a museum of natural history. Glass cases lined the walls, containing items I couldn't quite make sense of. Massive claw marks in steel plates, fragments of what appeared to be bone but at impossible scales, and weapons that looked more at home in fantasy games than military arsenals. "I imagine you have questions," Director Winters said, leading me deeper into the facility. "They'll be answered in time. First, I need to introduce you to your team." We entered what appeared to be a briefing room, but unlike any I'd seen before. 3-dimensional holograms filled the air, displaying topographical maps and what appeared to be tracking data. Around the central table sat 3 individuals who would become my new team. Master Sergeant Drake, Havoc Thorne, looked up first, his scarred hands pausing in their work of cleaning what appeared to be a modified M4 carbine. The weapon's modifications weren't standard issue. The metal had an odd, almost iridescent sheen, and the ammunition beside it looked like no rounds I'd ever seen. Lieutenant River, Ghost, Sinclair was poring over medical texts that, from my glimpse, contained anatomical diagrams of creatures that couldn't possibly exist. Her medical kit, spread out on the table, contained vials of liquids in colors I'd never seen in standard field medicine. Sergeant First Class Ash Frost Kingsley stood by the window, his sniper's eye trained on the swirling snow outside. The rifle slung across his back looked similar to a standard Barrett 50 cal, but the scope appeared to be tracking something in the storm that I couldn't see. "Team," Director Winters announced, "meet your new commander." The briefing that followed changed everything I thought I knew about reality. Project Chimera, it turned out, wasn't just another Black Ops unit. We were humanity's last line of defense against threats that most people believed existed only in mythology and nightmare. "The creatures you'll be hunting," Director Winters explained as she brought up a series of classified mission reports, "are what civilians would call cryptids, but that term barely scratches the surface. These entities represent a clear and present danger to human civilization, and their numbers are growing." The holographic display shifted to show footage that made my combat experience seem like training exercises. A creature moving at impossible speeds through a forest in the Pacific Northwest. An entity that seemed to phase through solid matter in the Nevada desert. Aerial footage of something massive moving beneath the Arctic ice. "Your previous combat experience is valuable," Winters continued. but you'll need to unlearn much of what you know about conventional warfare. These threats don't follow the rules of engagement you're used to. They don't die easily, and some don't die at all, at least not by conventional means. Thorne spoke up, his voice gravelly from an old injury. That's where the specialized equipment comes in. He lifted the modified M4. Custom loads, blessed metals, experimental compounds. Everything we use has been specifically designed for unconventional warfare against non-human entities. Sinclair added, the medical challenges are unique too. We're not just dealing with standard combat injuries. These creatures can affect human physiology in ways that defy conventional medicine. I've had to develop entirely new treatment protocols. And tracking them, Kingsley interjected, requires more than just good eyes and range calculations. Some of these things exist partially in other dimensions. Standard optics are useless. I took all this in, my mind racing to process the implications. Everything I'd trained for, every combat situation I'd survived, had been preparation for something far bigger than I'd imagined. The real war wasn't against other nations or terrorist cells, it was against something far older and more dangerous. Director Winters must have sensed my thoughts. Captain Blackwood, I know this is a lot to process, but we selected you for a reason. Your record shows an unusual ability to adapt to impossible situations, to make decisions that save lives when conventional wisdom says there's no way out. We need that kind of thinking. She brought up another hologram, this one showing recent satellite imagery of northern Minnesota, and we need it now. We've got a situation developing that requires immediate attention. A Wendigo has awakened, and it's hunting. The room fell silent. I could sense the tension in my new team. This clearly wasn't a standard mission, even by their unusual standards. Your first deployment as a team begins in 6 hours, Winters announced. I suggest you use that time to familiarize yourself with your equipment and each other. You're going to need every advantage you can get. As the briefing concluded and my team began their preparations, I found myself staring at the weapons and gear laid out before me. Everything I thought I knew about warfare was about to change. The real question was I ready for it? The next 6 hours were a crash course in a type of warfare that no conventional training could have prepared me for. Thorne walked me through the specialized ammunition, rounds made from blessed silver, hollow points filled with compounds whose names I couldn't pronounce, and magazines that had been inscribed with symbols that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. Sinclair's medical briefing was equally mind-bending. Forget everything you know about field medicine, she said, showing me a kit that looked more like a witch doctor's bag than standard medical gear. When these things wound you, they don't just hurt your body, they can affect your soul, your mind, reality itself around the injury. Standard morphine and bandages won't cut it. Kingsley's contribution to my crash course was perhaps the most unsettling. He handed me a pair of goggles that looked deceptively normal. These allow you to see what's really there, he explained. But be careful, sometimes not seeing is easier than knowing what's actually lurking in the shadows. As we geared up for deployment, I couldn't help but notice the rituals each team member performed. Thorne blessed his explosives with what smelled like holy water. Sinclair recited what sounded like Latin over her medical supplies. Kingsley cleaned his rifle while burning herbs that filled the air with sweet smoke. I had no such rituals yet, but I had a feeling I'd develop them soon enough. In this line of work, it seemed every edge counted, even the supernatural ones. Director Winters approached as we made our final preparations. Captain, she said, handing me a small metal object that looked like a compass but displayed readings I didn't understand. Remember, conventional tactics are just the foundation. These creatures have been around for millennia. They've seen every standard military strategy. You'll need to think beyond your training. The facility's hangar doors opened, revealing a heavily modified Black Hawk helicopter. As we boarded, I caught one last glimpse of the facility that had just changed my entire worldview. Somewhere in the swirling snow, I could have sworn I saw something massive moving beneath the ice. Our pilot, call sign, Wraith, began pre-flight checks. The helicopter itself was a testament to how different this unit was. Symbols etched into the metal, strange devices attached to the wings, and ammunition boxes marked with warnings in languages I'd never seen before. As we lifted off into the Arctic night, I looked at my team, the demolitions expert who could blow up things that technically didn't exist, the medic who could heal wounds that defied physics, and the sniper who could shoot at targets in other dimensions. This was going to be one hell of a first mission. The Black Hawk turned south toward Minnesota, and whatever horrors awaited us there. I checked my weapons one last time, feeling the weight of my new reality settling onto my shoulders. The war against the shadows had just begun, and I was now on the front lines. The Minnesota wilderness stretched endlessly below us, an endless sea of white broken only by the dark spires of pine trees. The temperature reading in the helicopter showed -20 degrees and dropping, but something told me the cold wasn't our biggest concern. 3 minutes to landing zone, Wraith called out over the intercom. Ground temperature is way below normal. Something's affecting the local climate. I looked at my team through the new goggles Kingsley had given me. Each of them glowed slightly, protected by whatever rituals and protective gear they'd prepared. The weapons showed similar auras, blessed, enhanced, ready for whatever awaited us. "Remember," Sinclair said, checking her medical gear one last time. "Wendigos aren't just physical threats. They get in your head. The hunger you'll feel, it's not yours. The desperation, also not yours. They project their own eternal starvation into their victims' minds." Thorne nodded, handling what looked like modified claymore mines. "They're fast too, faster than anything you've ever seen, Captain. Traditional perimeter defenses won't work. We need to think fourth dimensionally." The helicopter touched down in a small clearing. The moment the doors opened, the cold hit us like a physical force. But there was something else. A deep, primal wrongness that made every combat instinct I'd developed scream in warning. "Tracks," Kingsley announced, already scanning the tree line through his enhanced scope. "Not human, not animal either. They appear and disappear randomly, like it's shifting in and out of our reality." I consulted the strange compass director Winters had given me. The needle spun wildly before settling on a direction that somehow felt like it was pointing up and inside at the same time. "Indigenous lore says Wendigos were once human," Sinclair explained as we moved through the snow. "They chose to commit the ultimate taboo, consuming human flesh, but the act transformed them into something that can never be satisfied. The more they eat, the hungrier they become." The forest around us grew darker despite it being early afternoon. The trees seemed to lean inward, their branches reaching like grasping fingers. The snow dampened all sound, creating an unnatural silence that set my teeth on edge. "First victim sight ahead," Thorne reported, his modified sensors picking up disturbances in the snow. "Be ready. These scenes, they're not like anything you've seen in combat." He wasn't wrong. The clearing we entered looked like something from a nightmare. The snow was stained with blood, but it moved wrong, flowing upward in frozen rivers that defied gravity. What remained of the hunting cabin was twisted, the logs spiral curved into impossible shapes. Sinclair moved forward with her detection equipment. Multiple victims, but no bodies. It's keeping them alive somewhere, feeding on their fear as much as their flesh. A sound echoed through the trees, not quite a howl, not quite a scream, but something that made my combat-hardened team instinctively move into a defensive formation. Through my enhanced goggles, I could see the air itself warping around us. "Movement," Kingsley whispered, his rifle tracking something I couldn't see. "Multiple planes of reality. It's hunting us." The first attack came from a direction that my mind couldn't quite process. One moment, the space before us was empty. The next, a creature stood there. 15 feet of emaciated horror, skin pulled tight over impossible angles, antlers that seemed to pierce through dimensions. Its eyes, God, its eyes. They reflected not just hunger, but the concept of hunger itself, distilled into something that could drive a man mad. Through my goggles, I could see it existed in multiple layers of reality simultaneously. "Contact," I shouted, bringing up my modified M4. The blessed round sparked with strange energy as they left the barrel, tearing holes through the creature's multi-dimensional form, but it barely seemed to notice. Thorn's explosives detonated in carefully placed patterns, not just around the Wendigo but in spaces where it might shift to. The blast waves rippled through multiple planes of existence, momentarily pinning the creature in our reality. "Now," Sinclair shouted, throwing what looked like pouches of herbs and sacred materials in a pattern around us. Where they landed, lines of force appeared in my enhanced vision, creating a barrier that the Wendigo couldn't dimensionally shift through. Kingsley's rifle cracked, the sound somehow echoing both forward and backward through time. His enhanced round struck the Wendigo in points that hurt to look at, places where its form intersected with other dimensions. But the creature was far from finished. It moved like stopped motion footage, jerking from position to position faster than human eyes could track. The cold intensified until the air itself began to crystallize, and with it came the hunger, a deep, gnawing emptiness that tried to overwhelm our thoughts. "Defensive formation," I ordered, recognizing that standard tactics wouldn't work here. "Sinclair, maintain the barrier. Thorn, layered detonations, keep it materialized. Kingsley, target its anchor points." The Wendigo's screech distorted reality around us. Trees bent and warped, snow fell upward, and time itself seemed to stutter. Through my goggles, I could see it trying to pull us into the spaces between dimensions where it had trapped its other victims. That's when I noticed something in its movement pattern. Each dimensional shift followed a path that curved around Sinclair's barriers. It wasn't random, it was following rules we couldn't see but could perhaps exploit. "Thorn, concentrated detonations at these coordinates." I called out a series of positions, not in our space, but in the angles I could see through the enhanced goggles. "Kingsley, prepare to take the shot when it materializes." The trap worked. Almost too well. The Wendigo, forced to materialize fully in our reality, took on a form that our human minds could barely process. Its true appearance was something that would haunt my dreams forever, a twisted mockery of human form stretched through dimensions we weren't meant to perceive. Kingsley's shot struck true, a blessed round through what might have been its heart, if such a creature had anything analogous to human organs. The Wendigo's death threw us through a kaleidoscope of realities before it finally collapsed, its form settling into something almost pitifully small in death. But we weren't done. In the distance, through the dimensional distortion still rippling through the forest, we could hear the sounds of human suffering. "Life signs," Sinclair confirmed, consulting her equipment. "The victims, they're in some kind of dimensional pocket. We need to reach them before the space collapses." "How long?" I asked, already moving in the direction my compass indicated. "Minutes, maybe less. When these things die, all the spaces they've warped tend to snap back to normal. Anything caught in between." She didn't need to finish the thought. We moved through the twisted forest, following readings that made less and less sense the closer we got to our goal. The air itself seemed to resist us, thick with the lingering essence of the Wendigo's presence. The pocket dimension where it had stored its victims was hidden inside a shattered reality space that looked like a cave but felt like a wound in the world. Inside, we found the missing hunters, 5 of them, trapped in a state of perpetual terror, suspended in a place where time moved like molasses. Getting them out required all of Sinclair's expertise and Thorn's precision with dimensional charges. Each survivor had to be carefully extracted from the collapsing space, their minds and bodies protected from the reality warping effects of their imprisonment. As we evacuated the survivors to the waiting helicopter, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. In the wound-like cave, drawn in substances I didn't want to identify, were symbols. Symbols that suggested this Wendigo hadn't just been hunting randomly. It had been following a pattern, perhaps even taking orders. "Captain," Thorn called out, his scanner displaying readings that clearly troubled him. "You need to see this. These symbols. They match patterns we've seen in other cases. Different creatures, different locations, but the same underlying structure." "Document everything," I ordered, even as I felt reality beginning to restabilize around us. "Something tells me this isn't just a random encounter. There's a bigger picture we're not seeing yet." The flight back to base was quieter than our arrival. The survivors, sedated under Sinclair's care, would recover physically. Mentally, that remained to be seen. My team, despite their experience with the supernatural, seemed shaken by what we'd encountered. But more than that, we were all thinking about those symbols, about the possibility that what we'd faced was just a small part of something much larger and more terrifying. If creatures like the Wendigo were being directed, controlled even, what did that say about the true nature of the war we were fighting? As the helicopter carried us through the Arctic night, I studied the compass Director Winters had given me. The needle now spun freely, but occasionally it would stop, pointing towards something distant, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. This had been my first mission with Project Chimera, and already I could feel my understanding of reality shifting. What other horrors awaited us? What other impossible threats would we face? And most importantly, who or what was orchestrating it all? 2 weeks after the Wendigo incident, we found ourselves on a modified submarine off the coast of Maine. The vessel, like everything else Project Chimera operated, was far from standard military issue. The hull was inscribed with protective runes, and the sonar array had been augmented to detect things that shouldn't exist. Third fishing vessel this month, Thorne said, examining holographic projections of the wreckage sites. Whatever's down there isn't just hunting, it's systematically clearing human activity from its territory. The submarine's interior was cramped, made even more so by our specialized deep-sea combat gear. The suits looked like standard tactical diving gear at first glance, but closer inspection revealed otherworldly modifications. Crystalline panels pulsed with bioluminescent light, and the breathing apparatus incorporated filters designed to work in spaces where the normal laws of physics didn't apply. Pressure at this depth should be crushing us, Sinclair explained, monitoring readings on her medical equipment. But these waters aren't following normal physical laws. Something's warping the underwater space. Kingsley was adapting his sniper skills to our aquatic environment, working with modified harpoon guns and sonic weapons. Sonar's picking up structures down there, he reported. Geometries that don't match any known underwater formations. Some of these angles, they shouldn't be possible. I studied the underwater topography through my enhanced diving mask. The ocean floor below us wasn't natural. Massive structures lurked in the darkness, their architecture suggesting they weren't built by human hands. Some of the buildings seemed to shift and move when viewed through our specialized equipment, as if they existed partially in other dimensions. Depth charges picking up multiple contacts, our submarine pilot announced. But the signatures, they're like nothing in our database. Size estimates ranging from 20 to, that can't be right. What's the reading? I asked, though something in my gut told me I didn't want to know. According to these sensors, there's something down there over half a mile long, but it's not registering as a solid mass. It's like it's phasing in and out of our reality. We prepped for deployment, each team member performing their own rituals. Thorne blessed his underwater demolition charges with water from 7 different sacred springs. Sinclair applied protective unguents to our diving suits while chanting in a language that made my ears ring. Kingsley loaded his weapons with ammunition that glowed with an inner light. Remember, I briefed the team as we entered the airlock. We're not just dealing with the physical threats. Whatever's down there has been influencing human minds. Those fishing crews, they didn't just disappear, some of them turned on each other. Be ready for psychological warfare. The descent into the abyss was like entering another world. Our lights illuminated waters that moved wrong, currents that flowed in impossible patterns. Schools of fish swam in formations that spelled out words in ancient languages, their eyes glowing with unnatural intelligence. The ruins emerged from the darkness like a nightmare made real. Massive stone structures covered in carvings that seemed to move when you looked directly at them. Archways large enough to sail a battleship through, leading to spaces that our instruments couldn't map. And everywhere, signs of recent activity. The wreckage of fishing vessels arranged in patterns that hurt the mind to contemplate. Movement at 2 o'clock, Kingsley's voice crackled through our comm system. Big. Whatever it is, it's not bothering to hide anymore. Through the murky water, I saw it. a shape that combined the worst aspects of squid, whale, and human anatomy into something that should not exist. Its size was impossible to comprehend, its flesh shifting between solid matter and something else entirely. "Defensive formation," I ordered, feeling the water pressure change as the creature's presence warped reality around us. "Thorn, set up a perimeter with those sonic charges." "Sinclair, status on the reality anchors." "Active but struggling," she replied. "Whatever this thing is, it's trying to pull us into its own dimensional space. If that happens..." She was cut off as the creature made its first move. A tentacle larger than a subway train swept through the water, moving with impossible speed. We scattered, our enhanced suits barely allowing us to move fast enough to avoid being crushed. Kingsley's harpoon gun fired, the specialized projectile trailing a cable of blessed metal. It struck the creature but seemed to pass through it as if it were made of smoke. "Negative effect," he called out. "It's not fully manifested in our reality." That's when we heard it, a sound that shouldn't have been possible underwater, a sound that bypassed our ears and went straight to our minds. Images flooded my consciousness, ancient cities rising from the ocean depths, civilizations that existed before humanity drew its first breath, and creatures that ruled both sea and space. "It's trying to communicate," Sinclair gasped, her medical sensors going haywire. "No, it's trying to convert us, show us its version of reality." The water around us began to crystallize, not into ice but into geometric patterns that reflected higher dimensions. Through these crystals, I could see versions of Earth's history that never made it into any human record, ages when the oceans teemed with life that defied comprehension. "Focus," I shouted, fighting against the visions. "Thorn, those sonic charges. Detonate them in sequence, force it to fully materialize." The charges went off in a carefully orchestrated pattern, sending waves of sound energy that human ears couldn't perceive. The creature reacted violently, its massive form fully entering our dimension for the first time. The sight of it in its entirety nearly broke my mind. "Now," I ordered, "everything we've got." We attacked from multiple angles, each weapon designed to affect different aspects of its impossible biology. Kingsley's blessed harpoons found purchase in flesh that was now solid. Thorn's charges disrupted the dimensional energies it used to shift between realities. Sinclair's devices prevented it from mentally overwhelming us. But we were really just annoying it. The creature's counterattack came not in the form of physical violence, but as a psychic assault that threatened to shatter our sense of reality. Through the mental link it established, I saw its true nature. It wasn't just a sea monster, it was a guardian, protecting something far deeper in the ocean's abyss. That's when I noticed something in the ruins below, a pattern similar to the symbols we'd found in the Wendigo's lair. The same underlying structure, the same suggestion of external control. This creature wasn't acting alone either. "Fall back to the ruins," I ordered, a plan forming in my mind. "Thorn, those buildings, they're not just structures, they're machines, ancient technology." Understanding dawned in his eyes. He began placing charges at specific points on the ruins, guided by the architectural patterns that were becoming clearer the longer we looked at them. The creature seemed to realize what we were doing and moved to stop us, but too late. The charges detonated, not destroying the ruins, but activating them. Ancient machinery ground to life, sending pulses of energy through the water that even our enhanced senses couldn't fully process. The creature recoiled, caught in the same dimensional trap it had used to snare its victims. "It's weakening," Sinclair reported. "The ruins, they were built to contain these things." We pressed our advantage, using the ancient technology in concert with our modern weapons. The creature fought back desperately, its tentacles lashing out in patterns that suggested intelligence and training. This was no mindless beast. It was a soldier in some unfathomable army. The battle ended not with the creature's death, but with its retreat. Wounded by our weapons and trapped by the ancient machinery, it fled into deeper waters, leaving behind pieces of itself that seemed to evaporate into other dimensions. But we couldn't celebrate yet. The ruins held secrets that demanded investigation, and in the wreckage of the fishing vessels, we found survivors. People changed by their exposure to the creature's influence. Their rescue would test Sinclair's medical skills to their limit. As we photographed the ruins and collected samples, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple sea monster hunt. The symbols, the ancient machinery, the creature's tactical intelligence, it all pointed to a vast, organized force operating beyond human perception. Back on the submarine, analyzing our findings, Thorne voiced what we were all thinking. These ruins, he said, studying the patterns, they're not just one site. They're part of a network. There are more of them out there, all connected, all waiting to be activated. And more creatures like that one guarding them, Kingsley added. Trained, coordinated, acting with purpose. Sinclair looked up from treating the survivors we'd rescued. The real question is, who built these ruins? Who has the power to control creatures like that? And what are they planning? I stared at the symbols we'd documented, seeing the connections to what we'd found in Minnesota. 2 missions, 2 different types of creatures, but the same underlying pattern. Someone or something was building an army of nightmares, and we'd only scratched the surface of their operation. The submarine surfaced under a stormy Maine sky, but I knew our next mission would take us somewhere else. Following this pattern of symbols and ancient machinery, the war was escalating, and humanity didn't even know it was under attack. In my pocket, the compass Director Winters had given me pulsed with an odd energy. When I checked it, the needle pointed west, toward the desert. Something told me our next encounter would make this sea monster look like a warm-up exercise. The Mojave Desert shimmered under the merciless sun, heat waves distorting the horizon into rippling mirages. But through my enhanced goggles, I could see that some of those distortions weren't caused by heat. Reality itself was being warped, twisted by something moving beneath the sand. 3 small towns gone in the past month, Thorne reported, reviewing holographic maps projected from our modified Humvee. Population 0, buildings intact, no signs of violence, no blood, no struggle, they just vanished. We'd been tracking the disappearances across the desert, following a pattern that reminded me of the symbols we'd found in both Minnesota and Maine. Whatever was taking these people, it was working with purpose, precision, and patience. Seismic readings are off the charts, Kingsley said, monitoring specialized equipment that looked more like abstract art than military technology, but not normal seismic activity. It's like the ground is breathing. Sinclair was examining soil samples through a device that seemed to analyze metaphysical properties rather than physical ones. The sand here isn't just sand anymore. It's been changed at a fundamental level. Reality has been digested. Our vehicle was specially equipped for this environment, not just with traditional desert warfare gear, but with protective runes etched into its armor. Experimental sensors bristling from its frame, and a water supply that had been blessed by shamans from 3 different traditions. Movement, Kingsley called out suddenly, big, really big, but the sensors can't agree on its size. It's like it's changing as it moves. Through my goggles, I could see what he meant. Something massive was moving under the desert floor, but its dimensions kept shifting. One moment it appeared to be the size of a subway train, the next it could have swallowed a battleship. The sand above it flowed like liquid, defying gravity and natural law. "Park here," I ordered, selecting a rocky outcropping that my compass indicated was more real than the surrounding desert. "Thorne, set up a perimeter, those new quantum mines ready." "Ready as they'll ever be," he replied, unloading devices that looked like standard claymore mines but contained explosives that could damage things existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But we still don't know what we're dealing with. That changed moments later. The desert floor erupted in a spiral pattern, sand falling upward in a double helix. What emerged defied description, a massive worm-like entity that seemed to be made of overlapping realities, each segment of its body existing in slightly different dimensions. "Holy," Kingsley breathed, his sniper scope revealing details that his mind struggled to process. "It's not just one creature, it's like a colony, multiple beings merged into one form." Sinclair's instruments were going haywire. "Those missing people, I'm getting human life signs from inside that thing, but they're changed, integrated somehow." The creature's attack began not with violence, but with a fundamental assault on reality itself. The space around us began to fold, desert sand flowing like water, rocks softening into shapes that hurt to look at. The sky above rippled with colors that had no names in human language. Defensive positions, I ordered, but the concept of position was becoming increasingly meaningless as space itself warped around us. Thorn, those mines, create a stable zone. The quantum mines detonated in sequence, their explosions looking less like fire and more like tears in reality that temporarily forced the surrounding space to behave normally. In these pockets of stability, we could function, fight back. But the creature was unlike anything we'd faced before. It moved through dimensions as easily as we moved through air, each segment of its impossibly long body operating independently, yet in perfect coordination. When we damaged one section, others would shift to absorb the injury, existing temporarily in dimensions we couldn't reach. The towns, I realized, watching its movement pattern. Show me those disappearance sites again. Thorn projected the map, and suddenly the pattern became clear. The towns hadn't been random targets. They formed nodes in a massive pattern similar to the underwater ruins we'd found off Maine's coast. The creature wasn't just hunting, it was following a program, preparing something. Captain, Sinclair called out, the human life signs. They're not just victims, they're being used. Their minds, their consciousness, their processing power for something bigger. That's when we saw them. Glowing lines of force beneath the desert sand, connecting the disappeared towns in a vast geometric pattern. The worm creature wasn't just taking people, it was building a massive organic computer using human consciousness as components. We need to disrupt that pattern, I ordered. Thorn, place charges at these coordinates. Kingsley, target these intersection points. Sinclair, can you isolate the human signals? Give them something to fight against from the inside. We moved with practiced precision, each team member understanding their role in this impossible battle. Thorn's explosives were placed at key nodes in the geometric pattern. Kingsley's specialized ammunition struck points where multiple realities intersected. Sinclair broadcast psychic frequencies designed to reach the human minds trapped within the creature. The battle that followed bent both space and time. The creature, realizing its pattern was threatened, unleashed its full power. Reality buckled and warped around us. I saw versions of myself fighting in multiple timelines simultaneously, each slightly different, all connected. It's not just a creature, Sinclair shouted over the reality warping chaos. It's a probe. Something sent it here, gave it instructions. She was right. Through my enhanced goggles, I could see patterns in its behavior that suggested programming, purpose. This wasn't a natural entity, it was a tool, a highly advanced piece of biotechnology disguised as a monster. The breakthrough came when we synchronized our attacks with the rhythms of its dimensional shifting. Thorn's explosives detonated precisely as the creature phased between realities. Kingsley's shots struck at the exact moments when multiple dimensions aligned. Sinclair's psychic broadcast reached the trapped human minds during splits between dimensional frequencies. The creature's collapse was both beautiful and terrifying to witness. As its dimensional cohesion failed, we saw glimpses of other worlds through the gaps in its dissolving form. The human consciousness it had absorbed began to separate, each mind returning to normal space in a cascade of quantum effects. But our victory revealed something more disturbing than the creature itself. As it died, its body dissolved into streams of data, literal streams of symbols and code that matched the patterns we'd been tracking. Before the data dispersed completely, I managed to capture images of sequences that seemed to be coordinates, pointing to other locations around the globe. The rescue operation took hours. The freed humans were physically intact but mentally transformed by their experience. Sinclair worked tirelessly to stabilize them, using techniques that blended advanced medicine with metaphysical healing. They remember everything, she reported later as we secured the area, being absorbed, being used as living processors. But more importantly, they remember fragments of what they were processing: star maps, dimensional coordinates, instructions for something big. Thorn's analysis of the pattern beneath the desert confirmed our worst fears. This wasn't an isolated incident. These patterns, they're like circuit boards laid out across the entire planet. Everything we've encountered, the Wendigo, the sea creature, this worm thing, they're all part of it. They're building something. Or activating something that was already built, Kingsley added, still scanning the horizon for any residual dimensional anomalies. Those ruins in Maine, these desert patterns. How long has this been in the works? I studied the compass Director Winters had given me. Its needle now spun between multiple points, as if struggling to decide which threat was more immediate. The desert around us had settled back into normal space, but the signs of what had happened here would be visible to our enhanced equipment for years to come. We need to report this, I said finally. Whatever's controlling these creatures, whatever they're building up to, we're running out of time to stop it. As we packed our gear and prepared for extraction, I noticed something in the sand, a small, crystalline structure that hadn't been there before. Through my goggles, I could see it pulsing with the same kind of energy we'd encountered in all our previous missions. A seed of some kind, planted by the creature before we destroyed it. I carefully collected the crystal, knowing that its analysis might provide more clues about what we were really fighting. But as I stored it in a containment unit, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just finding clues anymore. We were being led somewhere, being shown pieces of a puzzle that was far bigger and more dangerous than we'd initially imagined. The desert sun was setting as our extraction helicopter approached, casting long shadows that seemed to move independently of the light. In the distance, I could have sworn I saw the sand shift in familiar patterns, suggesting that perhaps we hadn't destroyed the creature completely, or worse, that there were more of them out there, continuing their mysterious work under the desert sun. The Himalayan wind howled around our modified helicopter as we approached the coordinates of the last known location of Shakti village. 3 days ago, all communication with the remote settlement had ceased. Satellite imagery showed the buildings still intact, but of the 400 residents, there wasn't a single sign. Temperatures dropping faster than it should, Sinclair reported, checking instruments that measured both physical and metaphysical conditions. Not natural cold either, something's drawing the heat out of the air itself. We were equipped for high-altitude operations, our gear enhanced with both technological and mystical protection against the extreme conditions. But even through the layers of protective equipment, I could feel something watching us, something that made the ancient mountains themselves feel young by comparison. Movement on the ridgeline, Kingsley called out, his enhanced scope penetrating the swirling snow. Humanoid figures, but they're moving wrong. No one should be able to move that fast at this altitude. The village appeared through breaks in the clouds, nestled in a valley that seemed to defy normal geometry. The buildings were intact, just as the satellites had shown, but there was something off about their arrangement. Through my enhanced goggles, I could see that they formed patterns similar to the ones we'd discovered in the desert and under the sea. "LZ's not safe," our pilot warned. "Air currents are behaving impossibly, going to have to drop you half a mile out." We fast roped down into knee-deep snow, the cold immediately trying to penetrate our protective gear. The compass Director Winters had given me was spinning wildly, its needle occasionally pointing straight up into the dark clouds gathering above. "Thorn," I called out, "set up a perimeter, those new phase-locked proximity charges ready." He nodded, already placing devices that looked like standard motion sensors, but were designed to detect movement across multiple planes of existence. Ready, but something's already tripping them. The whole valley's alive with dimensional disturbances. We approached the village in combat formation, but nothing could have prepared us for what we found. The buildings were intact, yes, but they'd been subtly altered. Angles that should have been straight now curved in ways that suggested non-Euclidean geometry. Windows reflected scenes from places that couldn't exist on Earth. "Life signs," Sinclair reported, her medical sensors pulsing with strange energy. "Strong ones. The villagers, they're still here, but not as themselves anymore." The first encounter came without warning. A figure stepped out of a doorway, an elderly man by appearance, but his movements were wrong, too fluid, too precise. When he spoke, his voice resonated on frequencies that made our enhanced equipment crackle with interference. "The gods have returned," he said in perfect English, though his mouth moved in patterns that didn't match the words. "They have chosen us as vessels, as they will choose all of humanity in time." More villagers emerged from the buildings, each moving with the same unnatural grace. Through my goggles, I could see that their bodies were merely shells, inhabited by entities that existed primarily in other dimensions. "Possession," Sinclair breathed, her medical scanners revealing the true horror of what we were seeing, but not like any possession case on record. These entities, they're not spiritual. They're physical beings from another dimension wearing human bodies like environment suits. The attack came from all directions at once. The possessed villagers moved with impossible speed and strength, their bodies ignoring the limitations of human physics. But they weren't trying to kill us. They were trying to take us, to add our bodies to their collection. "Non-lethal containment only," I ordered, knowing these were still civilians under the influence of something beyond their control. Thorn, sonic barriers. Kingsley, suppression fire. Sinclair, start broadcasting those exorcism frequencies. We fought our way through the village, using specialized equipment designed to separate dimensional entities from human hosts. Thorn's sonic barriers created zones where the possessing entities couldn't maintain their hold on physical bodies. Kingsley's modified ammunition disrupted the energy patterns that allowed them to control their hosts. But for every villager we freed, 2 more appeared, moving in patterns that suggested military training. These weren't random possessions. The entities were organized, coordinated, following a battle plan that had probably been old before humans learned to make fire. "Captain," Sinclair called out, her voice urgent. "The monastery on the ridge. I'm picking up massive energy readings. Whatever's controlling these entities, it's up there." The monastery perched on the mountainside like a geometric impossibility, its ancient stones arranged in patterns that my enhanced vision revealed to be mathematical equations written in architecture. As we fought our way toward it, the possessed villagers became more desperate to stop us, sacrificing their hosts with ruthless efficiency. Inside the monastery, reality began to break down. Each chamber we entered existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, making basic movement a challenge in navigation through quantum space. Ancient texts lined the walls, written in scripts that changed and shifted as we looked at them. "These aren't religious texts," Thorn said, his scanning equipment analyzing the shifting symbols. "They're technical manuals. This whole monastery, it's a machine, a dimensional gateway." The deeper we pressed, the more resistance we encountered, not just from possessed villagers now, but from beings that had shed any pretense of humanity, things that existed in the spaces between dimensions that could only be perceived through our enhanced equipment. The central chamber of the monastery contained what appeared to be an altar, but our equipment revealed it to be a control center of sorts. Geometric patterns similar to those we'd found at our previous mission sites covered every surface, all flowing with energy that hurt to look at directly. "It's active," Sinclair reported, her sensors going haywire. "Whatever this is, it's not just a gateway, it's a beacon. It's calling something here." That's when we saw them. The true forms of our opponents, visible through dimensional tiers that were opening throughout the chamber. Beings of crystalline geometry and impossible physics. Ancient intelligences that had been exploring the spaces between dimensions since before Earth had an atmosphere. They spoke not in words, but in concepts that burned themselves directly into our minds. Images of Earth's past, of civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity emerged from the oceans, of a universe teeming with life that existed on different dimensional frequencies, all interconnected, all part of a vast plan that was approaching its culmination. The possessions, the village, I realized, watching the patterns of energy flow through the monastery structure. This wasn't an invasion, it was a test run. They're preparing humanity for mass possession. As if in response to my understanding, the entities launched their final assault. Reality itself became a weapon, space and time bending around us in patterns designed to shred our sanity, but our enhanced equipment, combined with the training and experience from our previous missions, gave us a fighting chance. Thorn, the altar, it's maintaining their connection to our dimension. If we can destroy it, He was already moving, placing quantum charges at key points in the geometric patterns. Kingsley provided covering fire with ammunition designed to disrupt dimensional frequencies, while Sinclair worked to protect our minds from the psychic assault the entities were launching. The battle pushed us beyond any normal human limits. We fought across multiple dimensions simultaneously, our enhanced equipment allowing us to perceive and interact with spaces that human minds weren't designed to process. The entities, realizing their plan was threatened, abandoned all pretense of subtlety. The monastery itself came alive, its ancient stones reshaping themselves to attack us. Possessed villagers fought with strength and skill borrowed from warrior cultures that had died before recorded history began, and through it all, the dimensional gateway pulsed with increasing power, trying to open wide enough to allow something even larger to step through. The breakthrough came when Sinclair noticed a pattern in the energy flows. The gateway, she shouted over the dimensional chaos. It's not just drawing power, it's drawing on human consciousness. All those possessed villagers, they're not just hosts, they're power sources. Understanding the true purpose of the possessions gave us the key to fighting back. Working together, we set up a feedback loop in the monastery's energy systems. As Thorn's charges detonated, they disrupted the geometric patterns in a cascading sequence that turned the entity's own dimensional technology against them. The effect was catastrophic. In a good way, the possessed villagers collapsed as their dimensional parasites were forcibly ejected back to their own reality. The monastery's impossible geometry began to collapse into normal space-time, and the gateway, the beacon that had been calling to something vast and ancient, started to close. But in those final moments, as reality reasserted itself, we all saw something through the closing dimensional tears, a glimpse of what the entities had been preparing for, of the true scale of what we were fighting against. It wasn't just about Earth, our entire universe was just one layer in a vast, multi-dimensional battlefield. The aftermath left us with more questions than answers. The villagers would recover physically, though the psychological scars of being possessed by ancient dimensional entities would take longer to heal. The monastery, returned to normal space, was just a building again, but one whose walls still held encrypted messages we'd spend years trying to decode. The symbols, Thorn said as we began our evacuation procedures. They're the same basic pattern we've been seeing everywhere. The Wendigo, the sea creature, the desert worm, these entities, they're all connected to something bigger. And getting more aggressive, Kingsley added, still scanning the mountain peaks for any residual dimensional activity. Each encounter has been larger in scale, more sophisticated in execution. Sinclair looked up from treating the recovering villagers. They're not just attacking anymore. They're preparing, converting human hosts, testing our defenses, setting up these geometric patterns across the globe. It's all building towards something. I studied the compass, which had finally settled into a steady rhythm, its needle pointing toward our next destination. Each mission had revealed more pieces of a puzzle that stretched across dimensions and eons. We were no longer just fighting individual monsters. We were caught in the middle of a war that most of humanity couldn't even perceive. As our extraction helicopter approached through the swirling snow, I couldn't shake the image of what we'd seen through those final dimensional tears. Something vast was moving in the spaces between realities, something that saw our universe as just another territory to be conquered. And somehow, I knew our next mission would bring us one step closer to confronting it directly. The Chicago skyline glittered in the night rain, its lights reflecting off wet streets and chrome surfaces. But through my enhanced goggles, I could see distortions in those reflections. Images that shouldn't be there, shapes that moved independent of their sources. Something was hunting in the city, using the urban environment's countless mirrors and reflective surfaces as doorways between realities. 7th victim found this morning, Thorn reported, examining holographic crime scene data in our modified surveillance van. Like the others, completely drained of identity, not just murdered, edited out of reality. Our vehicle was parked near the downtown financial district, disguised as a utility maintenance truck. The equipment inside was anything but standard utility gear, dimensional sensors, reality anchors, and weapons designed to harm things that technically didn't exist. The pattern's changing, Sinclair said, studying biological data from the victims. First victims were random, recent ones are specific. People with access to secure facilities, government buildings, research labs. It's gathering intelligence. Kingsley maintained surveillance from a sniper's perch 50 stories up, his specialized scope able to detect dimensional anomalies across multiple blocks. Movement patterns suggest military training. This thing isn't just hunting, it's conducting reconnaissance. The creature we were hunting had first appeared 3 days ago, emerging from a classified research facility that officially didn't exist. Initial reports suggested it was a failed experiment in quantum camouflage, but the truth was far worse. This wasn't just a shapeshifter, it was a living weapon designed to infiltrate and subvert reality itself. Another anomaly, Kingsley's voice crackled through our comms. Lobby of the Merchants Bank building. Security guard just walked in for his shift, for the 3rd time tonight. That's our target, I confirmed, watching through my goggles as the same guard entered the building again, each version slightly different from the last. It's not just copying appearances, it's fragmenting reality around its victims, creating multiple versions to confuse us. We moved into position, our gear modified for urban combat against supernatural threats. Regular civilians passed by without noticing anything wrong, their minds automatically editing out the impossibilities happening around them. But through our enhanced equipment, we could see the truth. Reality was coming apart at the seams. Remember, I briefed the team, minimal collateral damage. We're not in the mountains or desert anymore. Civilian casualties are unacceptable. Thorne set up quantum containment fields disguised as ordinary security checkpoints. Sinclair prepared neural stabilizers that looked like standard medical equipment. Kingsley's ammunition was designed to affect dimensional frequencies without penetrating physical matter. No stray bullets in this operation. The first contact came in the bank's marble-lined lobby. The security guard, the real one, lay unconscious behind his desk, while 3 identical copies of him patrolled the space, each moving with an unnatural precision that betrayed their true nature. Quantum signature confirmed, Sinclair reported. These aren't just copies, they're probability shadows, different versions of the same moment in time, all existing simultaneously. The creature noticed us before we could spring our trap. Its reaction confirmed our suspicions about its military origins. It moved with tactical precision, using civilian bystanders as cover while it retreated toward the elevator banks. The 3 guard copies moved to intercept us, each one shifting and changing form as they attacked. Contain and control, I ordered. Don't let it reach the upper floors. The battle that followed was unlike anything our previous missions had prepared us for. The creature didn't just change its appearance, it rewrote local reality around itself. Security cameras showed events that hadn't happened. Building blueprints rearranged themselves, and civilians caught in the chaos experienced the same moments multiple times from different perspectives. It's not running, Kingsley observed from his perch. Pattern suggests it's following a pre-programmed infiltration route, multiple targets on multiple floors. He was right. As we pursued the creature up through the building, we found evidence of its true mission. Classified documents had been accessed, secure servers breached, all while the regular office workers remained oblivious to the dimensional intruder in their midst. Thorne, I called out as we reached the executive floor. Status on those quantum locks? In place, he replied, activating devices that would prevent the creature from shifting between realities. But there's something else. These security systems it's accessing, they're already compromised. Something else has been here before. The revelation hit me as we cornered the creature in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. This wasn't an escape gone wrong, it was a test run. Someone had deliberately released this thing to see how it would perform in an urban environment. The creature, sensing it was trapped, revealed its true form. The sight would have shattered an unprotected mind, a being of living mathematics, its form constantly recalculating itself as it shifted through probability spaces. Through my enhanced goggles, I could see equations writing themselves in the air around it. Project Echo, it said in a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. Asset performance test successful, proceeding to secondary objective. Before we could react, it turned and threw itself through the window, but instead of falling, it seemed to fold itself through angles that shouldn't exist, each broken shard of glass reflecting a different version of reality. "Don't let it escape," I ordered, but we all knew it was too late. The creature hadn't been running from us, it had been completing its mission. We were just part of its test parameters. The cleanup operation took hours. Sinclair treated the civilian victims, using specialized equipment to stabilize their fractured memories. Thorne collected quantum resonance data from every surface the creature had touched. Kingsley maintained overwatch, watching for any signs that it might return. But the real work began when we accessed the building's secure servers. What we found confirmed our worst fears. The creature hadn't just been gathering intelligence, it had been validating existing data. Someone, somewhere, had detailed files on every secure facility in the city. The shapeshifter had just been confirming their accuracy. "Project Echo," Thorne said, examining the fragments of code we'd recovered. "It's got the same base structure as the symbols we've been tracking. This wasn't some rogue experiment. It's part of the pattern." Sinclair looked up from treating the last of the victims. "The physical templates it used, the way it manipulated probability, this is based on technology way beyond anything humans could develop. Someone's been sharing advanced dimensional science with certain government agencies." "But why?" Kingsley asked, finally joining us after securing his sniper position. "Why give humans this kind of technology? What's the endgame?" I studied the compass, which was now pointing in multiple directions simultaneously, as if confused by the quantum distortion still lingering in the air. The pieces were starting to come together, and the picture they formed was disturbing. The Wendigo in Minnesota, the sea creature off Maine, the desert worm, the mountain entities, and now this urban infiltrator. Each incident had pushed us to develop new tactics, new technologies. We weren't just fighting these things, we were being trained by them. As we prepared to extract, I noticed something in one of the broken windows, a reflection that showed not the city night, but a vast chamber filled with similar creatures, all being prepared for deployment. The image lasted only a second before reality reasserted itself, but the message was clear. This wasn't just an infiltration test, it was a dress rehearsal for something much bigger. And somewhere in the city, in an office building that probably looked just as normal as this one, someone was taking notes on our performance. "We need to report this," I said, already dreading the briefing with Director Winters. "Someone in our own government is working with these entities, preparing for something big. The question is, do they understand what they're really dealing with?" As our vehicle pulled away from the scene, the city lights reflected off the wet streets seemed less beautiful and more ominous. Each window could be a doorway, each reflection a disguise. The war we'd been fighting in remote locations had just gone urban, and the enemy was already inside our walls. The compass pulsed in my pocket, its needle now spinning with increasing speed. Whatever was coming, it was getting closer, and our next mission would likely bring us face to face with not just the creatures we'd been hunting, but the humans who thought they could control them. Pine Creek, Oregon looked perfect from our observation point in the hills. Too perfect. Every lawn was precisely maintained, every house painted in coordinating colors, every citizen going about their daily routines with mechanical precision. Through my enhanced goggles, I could see something else. A subtle shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, connecting every person in the town. Population 843, Sinclair reported, reviewing biological scans. Every single one showing identical brainwave patterns. That's not just impossible, it's wrong. We'd been called in after the regional Project Chimera office lost contact with their field agent. His last report mentioned unusual behavior patterns among the townspeople, followed by 3 days of silence. The satellite imagery showed normal activity, but the thermal scans told a different story. Body temperatures all exactly 39.4 degrees Celsius, Thorne said, checking his instruments. No variation, no individual differences, like they're being maintained at a specific temperature by something. Kingsley maintained overwatch from the tree line, his scope modified to detect neural patterns. They're networked, he reported. Not just behaviorally, their nervous systems are literally connected to each other. I'm seeing synaptic activity spanning between individuals. Our mission had seemed straightforward at first. Investigate the town, locate the missing agent, determine the cause of the unusual behavior. But as we watched the townspeople go about their synchronized activities, we all knew this was going to be anything but simple. Movement patterns suggest a hive structure, I observed, watching through my goggles as groups of citizens moved with coordinated purpose. But what's controlling them? We entered the town under cover of being FBI agents, investigating missing persons. Our enhanced equipment was disguised as standard law enforcement gear, but underneath the disguise, every piece was designed to detect and combat parasitic entities. The town sheriff greeted us with a perfect smile that never reached his eyes. Through my goggles, I could see faint traces of neural energy flowing from the base of his skull into the air around him, connecting to similar patterns emanating from every other person nearby. "Welcome to Pine Creek," he said, his voice carrying odd harmonics that our equipment detected, but human ears couldn't perceive. "We don't get many visitors these days. Everyone's so happy here, they rarely leave." The wrongness of the town became more apparent as we moved through it. Children played in perfectly synchronized patterns. Shop owners conducted transactions with identical gestures. Even the pets moved with unnatural coordination, all part of some vast choreographed performance. Neural parasites, Sinclair concluded, after scanning a group of passing citizens. Highly advanced. They're not just controlling their hosts, they're networking them into some kind of biological quantum computer. Thorne's equipment detected something else. Familiar geometric patterns laid out in the town's infrastructure. The street layout, power lines, water mains. They're all arranged in configurations we've seen before. This whole town is a massive organic processor. Our investigation led us to the local high school, where our missing agent had last been seen. The building looked normal, but our enhanced equipment revealed it as the nexus of the neural network spanning the town. Every classroom was filled with students and teachers, all moving in perfect synchronization as they went through the motions of education. "Server room," Kingsley reported from his new perch in the bell tower. "Basement level, major power consumption, but it's not electrical, it's biological." That's when things went wrong. One moment we were walking down a hallway, the next every person in the building turned to face us simultaneously. Through my goggles, I watched neural energy surge through the network like a power spike in a circuit. Anomalous entities detected. They spoke in perfect unison, their voices carrying those strange harmonics. Assimilation required. The attack came from all directions. Students, teachers, maintenance staff, all moving with identical purpose, trying to subdue us without causing serious harm to our bodies. They needed us intact for what was coming next. "Containment protocols," I ordered, activating protective fields around our team. "Non-lethal responses only, these are still civilians." Fighting our way through the school became a nightmare of coordinated opposition. Every person we encountered was part of the hive, their movements predicted and supported by the shared neural network. Traditional combat tactics were useless against an enemy that could instantly share information and coordinate responses across hundreds of minds. "The parasites," Sinclair called out as we fought our way toward the basement. "They're not just controlling people, they're upgrading them. Enhanced strength, perfect coordination, shared sensory input." She was right. The civilians we faced were performing physical feats that should have been impossible, their movements guided by a collective intelligence that could process combat scenarios across hundreds of networked minds simultaneously. The server room revealed the heart of the infestation. Banks of computers lined the walls, but they weren't running on electricity. Organic matter pulsed between the components, carrying information in quantum states that existed somewhere between digital and biological. "Found our missing agent," Thorne reported grimly, indicating a figure suspended in a web of neural tendrils. "He's been integrated into their network, some kind of specialized processor." Before we could rescue him, something shifted in the neural network. The collective consciousness controlling the town became aware of what we were seeing and decided to reveal itself. Through our enhanced equipment, we watched as the air itself seemed to crystallize, forming patterns that hurt to look at. Prototype test successful, the voice came from everywhere, spoken through hundreds of synchronized voices. Human neural architecture confirmed viable for quantum processing, proceeding with large-scale implementation. Images flooded our minds, not an attack, but a revelation. We saw the true purpose of Pine Creek. It wasn't just about controlling humans, it was about proving they could be networked, transformed into living components of a vast, organic supercomputer. The other sites, I realized, thinking of all our previous missions, the Wendigo, the sea creature, the desert worm, the mountain entities, the shapeshifter, they were all different approaches to the same goal, different ways of altering and networking human consciousness. And now they know which method works best, Sinclair added, her medical scanners revealing the full horror of what we were facing. These parasites, they're perfect for mass deployment, almost impossible to detect until it's too late. The situation demanded a terrible choice. The parasites were too deeply integrated with their hosts. Removing them would cause massive neural damage, but leaving them meant allowing this hive to spread, to serve as a blueprint for converting entire populations into networked processors. Options? I asked, already dreading the answer. Thorne held up a device I'd never seen before. Neural pulse generator. It'll fry the parasites, but the damage to the hosts will be severe. They'll live, but memory loss, personality changes. Do it, I ordered, knowing I'd see these faces in my nightmares forever. Better damaged than enslaved. The pulse generator's activation was anticlimactic, just a soft hum and a ripple in the air that our enhanced equipment showed as a cascade of failing neural connections. Throughout the town, people collapsed as the parasites controlling them died, the network that had bound them together dissolving into quantum static. The cleanup operation was the hardest part. Sinclair worked tirelessly to stabilize the victims, knowing that while their bodies would recover, their minds would never be the same. Thorne collected samples of the organic computer components for analysis. Kingsley maintained watch, alert for any signs that some part of the hive had survived. Our missing agent was the worst case. After being used as a specialized processor, his mind was almost completely gone. What remained was a jumble of images and information, glimpses of what the hive had been building toward. It's not just about control, he managed to convey before slipping into a coma. They're building a receiver. Something vast is coming. Needs human minds to perceive it, to let it in. As we prepared to extract, I studied the compass Director Winters had given me. Its needle now pointed straight up, as if indicating something approaching from above. The pieces were falling into place, each mission revealing more of a pattern that stretched across the globe and beyond. The parasites had been the most successful test yet, proof that human consciousness could be networked and repurposed. But for what? What kind of vast intelligence would need millions of networked human minds to manifest itself in our reality? We need to move fast, I told my team as our extraction vehicles arrived. If they've perfected the parasites here, the next phase won't be a small town test. They'll go big. Sinclair looked up from treating the last of the victims. The neural technology, the quantum computing capabilities, this is beyond anything humanity could develop. Someone's helping them, someone in a position of power. She was right. The level of organization and resources we'd encountered in our missions suggested high-level cooperation. The question was, how far up did it go and what had these human collaborators been promised in exchange for their help? As we lifted off in our helicopter, I watched Pine Creek shrink beneath us. From above, you couldn't see anything wrong with the town. Perfect houses, perfect lawns, perfect streets, all arranged in geometric patterns that only our enhanced equipment could detect. Somewhere out there, someone was reviewing the test results, preparing for the next phase of whatever vast plan we'd stumbled into. The compass pulsed in my pocket, its needle still pointing skyward. Whatever was coming, it was getting closer, and our next mission would likely bring us face to face with not just the inhuman intelligences behind these tests, but the human beings who had chosen to help them reshape humanity into something else entirely. The Project Chimera command center was chaos. Every screen showed a different crisis unfolding across the globe. Wendigo packs emerging in major cities, dimensional entities possessing entire neighborhoods, shapeshifters infiltrating government facilities, neural parasites spreading through population centers, and deep beneath the oceans, ancient structures were awakening. "It's all connected," Director Winters announced to the assembled response teams. Every mission, every encounter, they weren't isolated incidents, they were test runs for this moment. My team stood at the briefing room center, our enhanced equipment showing us layers of reality that others couldn't perceive. Through my goggles, I could see geometric patterns forming in the air itself, a vast mathematical equation being solved using the entire planet as its components. "The patterns," Thorne said, analyzing global sensor data, "they're not just similar to what we've seen before, they're exact matches. Everything we've encountered was placed precisely to create this configuration." Sinclair's medical scanners were detecting unprecedented levels of dimensional disturbance. The human consciousness modifications, the neural networks, the possession events, they're all linking up. Something's creating a global network of altered minds. "Multiple threats converging on these coordinates," Kingsley reported, marking locations on the holographic globe. 7 points forming a perfect geometric pattern across the Earth's surface. The compass Director Winters had given me was spinning wildly, its needle trying to point in all directions simultaneously. The mathematical patterns we could see through our enhanced equipment were growing more complex by the second, reality itself being rewritten by the equations they represented. "We've identified the primary incursion points," Director Winters continued, highlighting 7 locations across the globe. Each one corresponds to an ancient site of power, places where the membrane between dimensions is naturally thin. The locations matched perfectly with our previous missions: the Minnesota wilderness, the Maine coastline, the Mojave Desert, the Himalayan mountains, the Chicago financial district, the Oregon town, and a new site in the Amazon rainforest that was showing the highest levels of dimensional disturbance. "Multiple Project Chimera teams are engaging at each site," Winters explained, "but our analysts believe these are just distractions. The real threat is approaching from outside." The briefing room sensors shifted to show deep space readings. Something massive was moving through the void between dimensions, using the geometric patterns being created on Earth as a beacon to guide its arrival. "We're looking at a full-scale invasion," I realized, watching the patterns converge. "Not just of our space, but of our reality itself. They're trying to rewrite the fundamental laws that govern our universe." "Correct," Winters confirmed. "And they have help. Human collaborators at the highest levels of multiple governments all promise power and knowledge in exchange for their assistance. These humans believe they're helping to elevate humanity to a new state of existence." "More like preparing humanity to be processed," Thorne growled, his sensors detecting the true purpose of the neural modifications we'd encountered. "They're turning human consciousness into a quantum computing network to handle the calculations needed for the dimensional transfer." Our mission was clear but nearly impossible. We had to disrupt the geometric patterns before they could fully align. Each of the 7 sites needed to be neutralized simultaneously, or the entire effort would fail. "Your team will take the Amazon site," Winters ordered. "We believe it's the primary nexus point, where the dimensional breach will begin. Stop whatever you find there, and we might have a chance of preventing the full incursion." The flight to the Amazon was tense. Through the aircraft's enhanced windows, we could see reality beginning to fray around the edges. Geometric patterns formed in the clouds, and occasionally we caught glimpses of things moving in spaces that shouldn't exist. "Energy readings are off the charts," Sinclair reported as we approached our target. "The dimensional membrane is so thin here, I'm getting biological signatures from multiple realities simultaneously." The site itself was a massive temple complex that hadn't existed 24 hours ago. Ancient stones had erupted from the ground, arranging themselves into configurations that hurt to look at. Creatures from all our previous encounters were gathered there. Wendigos, dimensional entities, shapeshifters, neural parasites, all working in perfect coordination. Human forces too, Kingsley observed from his tactical position. Military units, but their signatures are wrong. Heavily modified with dimensional tech. They're not just collaborators, they're prototypes. The modified humans moved with impossible precision, their bodies enhanced by the same technologies we'd been fighting against. Through our enhanced equipment, we could see that their consciousness had been networked, linked to the vast intelligence approaching from beyond normal space. The battle that followed defied description. We fought across multiple dimensions simultaneously, reality shifting and warping around us as the geometric patterns approached completion. Every piece of equipment and training from our previous missions was put to the ultimate test. Thorne's explosives disrupted dimensional frequencies, while Kingsley's specialized ammunition struck targets that existed in multiple spaces simultaneously. Sinclair worked to counter the neural attacks that threatened to add our consciousness to the growing network. But we were badly outnumbered, facing enemies that had learned from every previous encounter. The modified humans knew our tactics, while the dimensional entities could predict our movements across probability spaces. Even with our enhanced equipment and experience, we were being overwhelmed. That's when I noticed something about the geometric patterns. They weren't just mathematics, they were a language, a set of instructions being fed into reality itself, and like any code, they could be altered. Thorne, I called out. The pattern arrays, they're programmable. We can't stop them from forming, but we can change what they're telling reality to do. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Working together, we began modifying the geometric patterns, using our enhanced equipment to alter the mathematical equations they represented. Instead of creating a beacon for the approaching entity, we turned them into a barrier. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Reality itself seemed to scream as the patterns shifted, transforming from an invitation into a wall. The dimensional entities reacted in panic, their carefully laid plans unraveling as the geometric configurations they'd spent years creating were turned against them. Multiple sites reporting similar success. Winter's voice came through our comms. The patterns are being reversed globally, but something's still coming through. She was right. Despite our efforts to alter the patterns, something vast and ancient was forcing its way through the weakened dimensional membrane. Through our enhanced equipment, we caught glimpses of it, a being of such complexity that even our modified perception could only process fragments of its true form. Full evacuation, I ordered, recognizing that we couldn't fight this entity directly. Fall back to secondary positions. As we retreated, the temple complex began to collapse, not just physically but dimensionally. The space it occupied was being crushed by the pressure of something impossibly vast trying to squeeze through a hole in reality that was rapidly closing. The modified humans and dimensional entities were pulled into the collapsing space, their bodies and consciousness absorbed into the vast intelligence that was now trapped between dimensions. The geometric patterns we'd modified had created not just a barrier but a prison, holding the entity in a space between spaces. Pattern stability at 60% and holding, Thorne reported as we reached safe distance. The dimensional membrane is regenerating. Whatever that thing was, it's contained. For now. But we all knew this wasn't over. The entity might be trapped, but it wasn't defeated. And somewhere out there, its human collaborators were still working to find another way to bring it through. As the dimensional disturbances began to fade, I studied the compass one last time. Its needle had stopped spinning and now pointed to something approaching from the north, multiple signatures moving with purpose toward our position. "We've got company," I announced, "and something tells me they're not here to thank us for saving reality." The final battle was about to begin, not just against the dimensional horrors we'd been fighting, but against the human organization that had helped them get this far, and somehow I knew this would be our hardest fight yet. The Amazon rainforest burned with otherworldly fire as reality struggled to heal itself. Through my enhanced goggles, I could see dimensional energy crackling between the trees like lightning, aftershocks from our effort to contain the vast entity that had nearly broken through into our world. Multiple vehicles approaching. Kingsley reported from his position. Military grade, but the signatures are wrong. They're running dimensional tech we've never seen before. My team took defensive positions as a convoy of black vehicles approached our location. They moved with an unnatural precision that suggested their drivers weren't entirely human anymore. Through our enhanced equipment, we could see that the vehicles themselves were partially phased into other dimensions, making them virtually indestructible. Project Infinity, Director Winter's voice crackled through our comms. The organization we've been tracking, they're a coalition of military and scientific leaders from multiple governments, all working toward what they call human transcendence. The vehicles surrounded us, and figures emerged. Humans in advanced combat gear that seamlessly integrated dimensional technology. Their movements were too perfect, their neural patterns showing signs of extensive modification. Through my goggles, I could see that their consciousness was networked not just with each other but with something else, something vast and patient. Captain Blackwood, one of them stepped forward, his voice carrying impossible harmonics. I'm General Pierce, Director of Project Infinity. I've been looking forward to meeting the team that's been interfering with our work. Your work? Thorne growled, his sensors detecting energy patterns similar to those we'd encountered in all our previous missions. You mean helping interdimensional entities invade our reality? Pierce smiled, but the expression wasn't human anymore. Invasion? No, you misunderstand. We're not fighting an invasion. We're facilitating an evolution, humanity's next great leap forward. Through our enhanced equipment, we could see the truth behind his words. The neural modifications, the dimensional technology, the geometric patterns. They weren't just about opening a door. They were about transforming humanity into something that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The entity you just trapped, Pierce continued, isn't our enemy, it's our mentor. For thousands of years, it's been preparing humanity for this moment. Every myth, every monster, every unexplained phenomenon, all part of a vast program to gradually adapt human consciousness for dimensional transcendence. Sinclair's medical scanners were revealing the full extent of what Project Infinity had done to themselves. You've completely rewritten your own neural architecture. You're not even human anymore. We're post-human, Pierce corrected. And what we've achieved is just the beginning. The entity you trapped holds the key to humanity's transformation. Every test, every encounter you faced was designed to prove that human consciousness could be successfully modified and networked. The pieces finally fell into place. The Wendigo in Minnesota, a test of human consciousness under extreme physical transformation. The sea creature off Maine, an experiment in communicating across dimensional frequencies. The desert worm, a trial of neural networking across multiple hosts. The mountain entities, practice in human consciousness transfer. The shapeshifter, a test of identity fluidity. The hive mind, proof of concept for mass consciousness networking. And now you're here to what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Force this evolution on the rest of humanity. We're here to complete what we started, Pierce replied. The entity may be trapped, but its power can still be channeled. The geometric patterns you modified, they're not just a prison, they're a transformer, and this site is now the perfect conductor. As if on cue, the dimensional energy crackling through the forest began to coalesce, forming new geometric patterns that branched out like a neural network. Through our enhanced equipment, we could see similar patterns forming at the other 6 sites around the globe. Billions of human minds, Pierce continued, his voice taking on that same impossible harmonic. All connected, all transformed, all ascending to a new state of existence. Those who survive the process will become like gods. And those who don't, Sinclair demanded. Acceptable losses in the name of human evolution. That's when we noticed something about the geometric patterns forming around us. They were different from the ones we'd encountered before. More complex, more aggressive. These weren't just meant to open a door or contain an entity. They were designed to forcibly rewrite the consciousness of every human being on Earth. You do realize, I said, watching the pattern spread, that thing you call a mentor, it's not interested in helping humanity evolve. You're not creating gods, you're creating processors, living components for its dimensional machinery. Even if that's true, Pierce replied, the power we'll gain is worth any cost. Humanity's time as a single-dimensional species is over. The future belongs to those who can transcend reality itself. Yeah, Thorne said, about that future. He triggered the quantum charges he'd been secretly placing while Pierce talked. The explosion wasn't physical, it was dimensional, disrupting the geometric patterns before they could fully form. The forest around us seemed to ripple as reality reasserted itself. The battle that followed was unlike anything we'd faced before. Project Infinity's forces weren't just enhanced humans. They were prototypes for what they wanted all of humanity to become. They fought across multiple dimensions simultaneously, their networked consciousness allowing them to coordinate with inhuman precision. But we had something they didn't: experience fighting exactly this kind of threat. Every mission, every encounter had taught us how to combat dimensional warfare. More importantly, we understood what we were fighting for, not transcendence, but humanity itself. Thorne's explosives disrupted their dimensional phasing, forcing them to exist fully in normal space where they could be fought. Kingsley's specialized ammunition severed their neural connections, breaking their network coordination. Sinclair's medical knowledge helped us target the weaknesses in their modified biology. The turning point came when we realized that the trapped entity wasn't as contained as we'd thought. Project Infinity wasn't just channeling its power, they were being influenced by it, their modified consciousness slowly being overwritten by its vast intelligence. Pierce, I called out as the general's form began to shift, his humanity dissolving as the entity exerted more control. Look at yourself. Look at what you're becoming. But it was too late. The dimensional barrier we'd created was failing, and the entity was pushing through, not physically but mentally, spreading its consciousness through the network of modified humans. Pierce and his forces began to transform, their bodies twisting into forms that reflected their lost humanity. One chance, I told my team, we have to overload the geometric patterns, force a dimensional reset. That much energy, Sinclair warned. It could kill everyone whose consciousness has been modified. Better dead than what they're becoming. Working together, we used our enhanced equipment to amplify the geometric patterns, pushing them beyond their design limits. The effect was like a dimensional bomb. Reality itself seemed to hiccup, and every modified human in range simply shut down. Their enhanced consciousness couldn't handle the sudden return to normal dimensional space. The entity, its connection to our reality suddenly severed, was forced fully back into the space between dimensions. The geometric patterns we'd modified collapsed, sealing the breach permanently. In the aftermath, the forest was silent except for the sound of normal, earthly rain. Multiple sites reporting similar results. Director Winter's voice came through our comms. The dimensional incursions have been contained. Project Infinity's forces are down. We've won. But looking at the fallen forms of Pierce and his people, I wasn't so sure. They had been wrong, catastrophically wrong, but they were also victims. The entity had been playing a long game, using humanity's desire for advancement, for transcendence, against itself. We spent the next few days helping with the cleanup operation. Sinclair worked to save as many of Project Infinity's modified personnel as she could, though most would never fully recover. Thorne and Kingsley gathered data on the dimensional technology, ensuring it couldn't be replicated. In the end, we found Project Infinity's main facility, a vast complex hidden beneath the Nevada desert. The files we recovered told the full story. They had discovered the entity decades ago, thought they could control it, use its knowledge to transform humanity. Instead, it had used them, turning their own ambitions into tools for its invasion. So what now? Thorne asked as we finished our final report. There could be more of them out there, more entities, more projects like Infinity. Now, I said, studying the compass Director Winters had given me, its needle finally still. We keep watching, keep fighting, not just against monsters but against the kind of hubris that thinks it can control them. And the next time something tries to invade our reality, Kingsley asked, we'll be ready, because we know the truth now. The real monsters aren't the creatures we fight, they're the choices that let those creatures in. As our helicopter lifted off from the Amazon site, I looked back at the forest through my enhanced goggles. The dimensional energy was gone, reality restored to its proper frequency, but somewhere out there, in the spaces between spaces, other entities were watching, waiting, and somewhere other humans were dreaming of godhood, willing to risk everything for power they couldn't possibly control. The war wasn't over, it had just changed frequencies.